Hello, my name is Nicole Schoen, and this is Indian Camp by Ernest Hemingway. At the shore, there was another rowboat drawn up. The two Indians stood waiting. Nick and his father got in the stern of the boat, and the Indians shoved it off, and one of them got into row. Uncle George sat in the stern off the camp rowboat. The young Indians shoved the camp boat off and got in to row Uncle George. "Where are we going, Dad?" Nick asked. "Over to the Indian camp. There is an Indian lady very sick." "Oh," said Nick. Across the bay, they found the other boat beached. Uncle George was smoking a cigar in the dark. The young Indian pulled the boat way up to the beach. Uncle George gave both the Indians cigars. They came around a bend and a dog came out barking. Ahead were the lights of the shanties where the Indians' bark pillars lived. More dogs rushed out at them. The two Indians set them back to their short shanties. In the shanty nearest the road, there was a light in the window. An old woman stood in the doorway holding a lamp. Inside a wooden bunk lay a young Indian woman. She had been trying to have her baby for 2 days. All the old women in the camp had been helping her. The men had moved off up the road to sit in the dark and smoke out of range of the noise she made. She screamed just as Nick and the two Indians followed his father and Uncle George into the shanty. She lay in the lower bunk, very big under a quilt. Her head was turned to one side. In the upper bunk was her husband. He had cut his foot very badly with an axe 3 days before. He was smoking a pipe. The room smelt very bad. Nick's father ordered some water to be put on the stove, and while it was heating, he spoke to Nick. "This lady is going to have a baby, Nick," he said. "I know," said Nick. "You don't know," said his father. "Listen to me. What she is going through is called labor. The baby wants to be born, and she wants it to be born. All her muscles are trying to get the baby born. That is what's happening when she is screaming." "I see," said Nick. Just then, the woman cried out. "Oh, Daddy, can't you give her something to make her stop screaming?" asked Nick. "No, I don't have any anesthetic," his father said. "But her screams are not important. I do not hear them because they are not important." Her husband in the upper bunk rolled against the wall. "These must boil," he said, and began to scrub his hands in the basin of the hot water with a cake of soap he brought from the camp. He watched his father's hands scrubbing each other with the soap. While his father washed his hands very carefully, he talked. "You see, Nick, babies are supposed to be born head first, but sometimes they're not. When they're not, they make a lot of trouble for everybody. Well, I'll have to operate on this lady. We'll know in a little while." When he was satisfied with his hands, he went out and went to work. "Pull back that quilt, will you, George?" he said. "I'd rather not touch it." Later, he started to operate. Uncle George and 3 Indian men held the woman still. She bit Uncle George on the arm, and Uncle George said, "Damn squawk, bitch!" And the young Indian who had rowed Uncle George over laughed. Nick held the basin for his father. It took a long time. His father picked the baby up and slapped it to make it breathe and handed it to the old woman. "See? It's a boy, Nick," he said. "How do you like being an intern?" Nick said, "All right." He was looking away to not see what his father was doing. "There. That gets it," said father. Nick didn't look at it. "Now," his father said, "there's some stitches to put in. You can watch this or not. Nick, just as you like. I'm going to sew up the incision I made." Nick did not watch. His curiosity had been gone for a long time. His father finished and stood up. Uncle George and the 3 Indian men stood up. Nick put the basin out in the kitchen. Uncle George looked at his arm. The young Indian smiled reminiscently. "I'll put some peroxide on that, George," the doctor said. "I'll be back in the morning," the doctor said, standing up. "The nurse should be here from St. Ignace by noon, and she'll bring everything we need." He was feeling exalted and talkative, as football players are in the dressing room after a game. "Oh, you're a great man, all right," he said. "Ought to have a look at the proud father. They're usually the worst sufferers in these little affairs," the doctor said. "I must say he took it all pretty quietly." He pulled back the blanket from the Indian's head. His head came away wet. He mounted on the edge of the lower bunk with the lamp in one hand and looked in. The Indian lay with his face towards the wall. His throat had been cut from ear to ear. The blood had flowed down into a pool where his body sagged to the bunk. His head rested on his left arm. The razor lay, edge up, in the blankets. "Take Nick out of the shanty, George," the doctor said. There was no need for that. Nick, standing in the door of the kitchen, had a great view of the upper bunk when his father, the lamp in one hand, tipped the Indian's head back. It was just beginning to be daylight when they walked along the logging road back towards the lake. "I'm terribly sorry I brought you along, Nicky," he said. "Father, all this operative exhilarant's gone. It was an awful mess to put you through." "Do ladies always have such a hard time having babies?" Nick asked. "No. That was very, very exceptional." "Why did he kill himself, Daddy?" "Don't know, Nick. He couldn't stand things, I guess." "Do men kill themselves, Daddy?" "Not very many, Nick." "Do many women?" "Hardly ever." "Do they ever?" "Oh, yes, they do sometimes." "Daddy?" "Yes?" "Where did Uncle George go?" "He'll turn up all right." "Is dying hard, Daddy?" "No, I think it's pretty easy, Nick. It all depends." They were seated in a boat, Nick in the stern, his father rowing. The sun was coming up over the hills. A bass jumped, making a circle in the water. Nick trailed his hand in the water. It felt warm in the sharp chill of the morning. In the early morning, on the lake, sitting in the stern of the boat, with his father rowing, he felt quite sure that he would never die.